We just spent the first few years of our career trying not to be sexy. I think that's what it is. And now we've just let it go. It's like it's time they all saw what's really going on.
We've got leather upstairs, we've got leather downstairs.
Denim up here.
We've got...
Everyone's a winner, baby, that's for sure. Every track on it's like a single.
It's kind of a perfect album, Ian.
I think that was deliberate. Invoice me for the microphone if you need to.
It's February 2011, and the sun is shining in Los Angeles, California. The band, known as Arctic Monkeys, are busy at work adding the finishing touches to their fourth studio album, Suck It and See, at the legendary Sound City Studios. On the final day of recording, Alex Turner, the band's frontman, walks into a nearby guitar store, where a rather unusual looking guitar catches his eye. The guitar is teardrop shaped, has 12 strings, an aged sunburst finish, and more knobs and switches than you'd know what to do with. The guitar is a Vox Starstream, an incredibly rare and unique sounding instrument manufactured in the 1960s, a welcome addition to Alex's collection. But little did he know at the time that the arrival of this guitar would change the sound of the Arctic Monkeys forever. Arctic Monkeys are one of a very short list of British bands to break America in recent history.
USA! USA! USA!
But for a band to achieve this 5 albums in is virtually unheard of. The band's debut album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, became the fastest selling album in UK chart history, selling over 360,000 copies in its first week. Most bands that have this level of success this early on in their careers struggle to replicate the magic and widespread popularity of that first record. In fact, several bands that we know and love today are living in the shadow of their former success. I don't need to name them, you know who they are. But Arctic Monkeys were different. They had something up their sleeve that no other band in recent history was able to achieve, and that was the second coming. To this day, AM is widely considered to be Arctic Monkeys' best album, boasting 6 singles. Yeah, you heard me right, 6. The album drew much critical acclaim. It was nominated for a Mercury Prize. The lead single and opening track, Do I Wanna Know, was nominated for a Grammy, and currently has just over 2 billion plays on Spotify. Fast forward to the present day, and the album still sounds fresh, new and exciting. At least to me, anyway. And it turns out most of us agree. AM is the best-selling vinyl album of the last decade here in the UK. And just this year, Apple Music ranked AM at number 59 in their list of the top 100 albums of all time. But what made AM so special? How did the band produce such a flawless album with no skips? How did the band manage to achieve such a different and unique sound compared to their previous albums? In this video, we'll uncover the unique sequence of events that led to the masterful creation of Arctic Monkeys' most celebrated album, including how the album was very, very close to being called something else entirely. This is the untold story of AM. Alex Turner has been quoted stating that AM was the album that the band were always trying to make. But to really understand what Alex means by this, we have to go back in time a little bit, all the way back to 2005 in fact, during the writing of the band's debut album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. The early 2000s was a special period in rock music history. Both the UK and the East Coast of America were experiencing a vibrant indie rock music scene. The Strokes were everywhere, and many bands wanted to look and sound like them.
I just wanted to be one of the Strokes.
And they were as culturally significant here in the UK as they were in the US. And their early legacy gave rise to bands like the Libertines, the Cribs, the Vines, just to name a few. But whilst the indie music scene was breaking into the mainstream, the UK's vibrant underground hip-hop scene was experiencing a new wave of exceptional talent. Talent that Arctic Monkey songwriter Alex Turner took notice of. Alex Turner has spoken in past interviews about his love for roots maneuver.
Ready to be taking them drastic measure. Get me my treasure, splurge, could not give a brand new.
And his appreciation for rap music is plain to see. When examining the lyrical content of Arctic Monkey's debut album, we can see that the lyrical theme of every song is observational. As with rap music, Alex is writing about things that he's witnessed. Only for Alex, it was on the streets of Sheffield, rather than your classic Brooklyn or Detroit setting. Every song is littered with witty and humorous takes on the mundane. Alex also sings with his regional accent. This is very uncommon amongst most singers in bands, but very common amongst rappers. Every line on Arctic Monkey's first album is just packed with words, and because of this, Alex has no choice but to deliver them in a fast and rhythmic way. If we were to take the song I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, for example, you can see that Alex sings a word on almost every downbeat in the chorus. In fact, the lyrics are almost perfectly syncopated with each downstroke of the guitar. And because of this, there's little to no movement in the vocal melody. At the time, this way of singing was unique. It was downright strange for a rock band to approach singing like this, but it just worked. Ever since the band's legendary first album, Arctic Monkeys have been experiencing somewhat of a drastic evolution. Favourite Worst Nightmare, the band's sophomore album, saw the band go heavier, lighter, faster and slower all at the same time. Brainstorm was the heaviest and fastest song the band had ever released. Only Ones Who Know, perhaps the slowest and most ballad-like song the band had ever written. Humbug, Arctic Monkey's third album, saw the band explore desert rock and psychedelia, packing just one guitar each and heading for Josh Homme's Rancho de la Luna in the California desert. But what many of us wouldn't have known is that during this period, Alex was receiving singing lessons whilst he lived in New York, and this had a direct impact on the way that he wrote songs for Humbug. The songs had fewer words, with Alex focusing on melody rather than rhythm, and Alex explains his more intentional approach to singing in this interview with Zane Lowe.
When we made that record, I can't remember trying to even sing before that. I didn't really think of it as singing until then, and Mars and I wrote those songs for the first record, and suddenly it was like we were trying to sing like singers.
Arctic Monkeys frequently speak about how working with Josh Homme on Humbug was a pivotal moment for the band. They talk about the experience as if it was a musical education, discovering new instruments, new guitar pedals, and new production techniques. The band have even said that AM just simply wouldn't have been possible had they not had this musical experience with Josh Homme. It was during these sessions that Josh Homme encouraged Alex to lean more into his singing ability. 2011's Suck It and See, the band's fourth studio album, followed shortly after. This album is possibly the band's most slept on, seldom talked about and often left in the shadow of AM. But when you take a closer look at the characteristics of this record, you realise that all of the clues were there for what was about to come. A shift to a more poetic style of lyricism, with a more inward-looking, romantic and sentimental lyrical style. The humorous, witty and observational lyrical style from the band's first few albums is still there, but their delivery has been redressed in Alex's new melodic singing style. Not to mention, Alex now has a clear subject matter he wants to write about: relationships. Perhaps the best song to demonstrate this new writing style is the album's title track, Suck It and See. The lyric, "I couldn't get the hang of poetry," could be interpreted as a direct reference to what Alex was trying to achieve at the time with the songwriting. And maybe at the time of writing Suck It and See, he wasn't all that convinced that he was hitting the mark. But with lines such as "be cruel to me 'cause I'm a fool for you" suggest otherwise to me. I wish I could come up with stuff like that. Arctic Monkeys said that AM was the album that the band were always trying to make, and it took the band 5 albums and 8 years to make it happen. But why? Well, the band simply didn't have the right tools in their armoury to create AM back in 2005. Alex couldn't really sing when Whatever People Say I Am was released. He developed and improved his craft with every album, and it was the same for the rest of the band. They had to undergo some sort of musical education to enable them to bring their ideas to life. Without it, AM simply wouldn't have been possible. It's the beginning of 2012, and Arctic Monkeys are midway through touring the Suck It and See album, but the band are getting tired of playing the songs from their new album live, and they're desperate to create something new to freshen up the live set. So the band book in some studio time during a break in their tour. They record the single Are You Mine and B-side Electricity. The band subsequently decide to release the single on Record Store Day. The song is incredibly well received by fans, and it quickly becomes the band's biggest song. Its success caught the band off guard.
No, we actually recorded Are You Mine in Sheffield, like, you know, I don't know, 6 months before the rest of it, yeah. But decided to include it on the record just because it was the gateway to the rest of it in a way. Like, you know, we sort of looked at that song and all agreed, and everybody who's into the band seemed to also feel like it became like the biggest tune we had there, and so we were like, well, what? You start to look at it and be like, what is it about it? And I don't know, it's got that kind of almost this sort of contemporary R&B, like backing vocal moments in that. It was something that we definitely wanted to explore and more on the new record, yeah.
In my mind when she's not right there beside me.
To this day, Are You Mine is the band's set closer. In fact, it has been ever since the AM tour back in 2014. Are You Mine was somewhat of a happy accident for the band, but it was the spark that the band needed to try something new. Are You Mine was different in sound from the songs on the Suck It and See album. It swapped those clean, jangly guitar sounds for riffs reserved exclusively for the bottom 3 strings of the guitar. The song also introduced R&B style vocals and drums to the band's sound for the very first time. This new sound would eventually become the inspiration and the North Star for the sound of the next Arctic Monkeys album. The period after the Suck It and See tour was a special time for the Arctic Monkeys. The band had all moved to LA, and it was the first time in a long time that all 4 members lived in the same place, not limited by geographical location this time around. The band were able to take a different approach to the making of their next record. Instead of Alex going away to write and coming back to the band with 12 songs for a new album, the band rented rehearsal space in a small studio in downtown LA called Sage and Sound Studios for half a year. This was the first time that the band blurred the lines between the rehearsal space and the studio. It allowed them to create in an entirely new way. Rather than jamming songs out in a rehearsal room, the band used a tape machine as a device to help them build out ideas into songs, looping rhythm tracks, and writing guitar and vocal parts over the top, a bit like a hip-hop artist would. AM was the result of daily writing and recording by the band for about half a year, with the rhythm section of the band, Matt and Nick, creating beats and loops, a bit like a beatmaker would for a hip-hop artist. Alex would then use these loops to write chords, melody, and eventually lyrics.
And then I suppose we did this song, the first song on the record, Do I Want to Know, I suppose, was when that idea then went to like the next phase, and then it started to be, you know, we were almost kind of trying to apply what I would imagine the compositional perspective of like a hip-hop or R&B producer would be to a 4-piece rock and roll band. Like, and kind of, you know, manipulating the instruments to make sounds that kind of become building blocks, like as if the way I'd imagine like they construct a beat for like a rap song or something.
A great example of where this writing technique is most obvious is on the album's lead single, Do I Want to Know. Rick Beato explains the strangeness of this track really well, specifically how the vocal rhythm isn't synced with the instrumental loop at all. The melody instead weaves in and out of the loop pattern.
Song number 20 is probably the most different one on the entire list, and the reason it's unique is because it's actually a really weird riff to sing over.
As a guitarist and songwriter myself, I don't think Alex could have written this vocal melody whilst playing the riff at the same time. In fact, he most likely would have had to teach himself to sing and play the riff on the guitar at the same time after the song was made. This type of vocal line just doesn't come naturally whilst you're playing the guitar, unless you're writing over a loop. Writing in this way gives you the freedom to go wherever you want rhythmically and melodically. So the band took a different approach to songwriting this time around. Matt and Nick made demo loops, and Alex wrote the song around them. But how did the band achieve such a unique sound with AM? How did the band get their recordings to sound so bassy, punchy and warm sounding? Well, the band recorded their demos on a 70s 4-track cassette tape, gifted to Alex for his birthday. Jeez, this guy gets a lot of nice gifts, doesn't he? Vintage cassette tape for one birthday, vintage piano for another. I need richer friends. Matt Helders claimed in an interview with Engineering the Sound that the album's warm and punchy sound was down to the crap quality electronics from that 4-track cassette tape, which makes sense. It's why many musicians still choose to use analog equipment to record with. Analog electronics have a warm, magical quality to them that can't be reproduced by software. Sure, you can get close, but there's nothing like the physical thing. It's for this very same reason why many of us still choose to listen to music on vinyl. In the same interview, James Ford, Arctic Monkeys' longtime producer, states that he imported these tape recordings into Ableton Live. Ableton is a popular digital audio workstation, or DAW for short. It's similar to Pro Tools or Logic Pro. Now, this production choice gave the band the best of both worlds: the warm and vintage sound of the tape recordings, and the flexibility and convenience of modern day production techniques to really bring these tape recordings to life. This was followed by more tracking sessions at Rancho de la Luna, the studio where the band had previously recorded Humbug, and lastly Vox Studios. This is where the band experimented with drum machines and drum embellishment for the first time. I remember back to when AM was first released. I remember very clearly my musician friends saying, "Where are all the drum fills?" For a drummer aficionado, the drums were oddly simple, and unlike what we'd come to expect from the Agile Beast himself. Well, it turns out that this was deliberate. In a recent interview with Zane Lowe, Helders actually talks about the existence of a rockier version of Why Do You Only Call Me When You're High.
And there's this weird version of I forget what song it is that we did. Oh no, in fact no, it was even on AM we tried to do certain songs more in the style of like Are You Mine? And it didn't quite, that felt a bit forced, like we were trying to like really like bring the rock too much to some of these songs that needed to be a bit more soulful and like hip hop sounding. And there is a weird version that I've got somewhere of like Why Do You Only Call Me When You're High that sounds a bit like Are You Mine? That is like really fun to listen to, but it just wouldn't have worked.
So the song started off initially sounding more like Are You Mine? Now, it's unlikely that we'll ever get to hear this rockier version, but my bet is that this rockier version has a more intricate and traditional rock drum part like we hear on Are You Mine, with more fills and a more humanistic playing style. The drums that ended up on the final version of the record sound to me like they were deliberately simplified to give the song more of an R&B feel. It's also important to note that a more simple and loopable drum section allows for the drums to be more easily layered with samples, but more on that later. The band experimented with drum machines. The album Closer, I Wanna Be Yours, is a great example of this. A vintage Selmer drum machine features prominently on this song, using the Liverpool setting with a touch of spring reverb from a Fairchild. But our Agile Beast also experimented with his live drum sound, attempting to make his playing sound more robotic. A good example of where this works well is on the song Fireside. Helders recorded the main beat for the song on a traditional drum kit. He then separately recorded the 16th note pattern that we hear in the song on a kick drum turned on its side using regular drumsticks. And the final result works really well on the record. So production-wise, we've talked a lot about drums, but what about the other instrument groups? Well, for the bass parts, Nick used a trusty P bass, likely the very one he bought from Norm's Rare Guitars. But the bass production didn't stop there. In fact, on the majority of the record, Nick doubled up his bass parts with a baritone guitar. You can hear the baritone most prominently on One for the Road or Knee Socks. A baritone guitar has a longer scale length, which allows for a lower tuning. Popular tunings for baritones include a perfect fourth, fifth, or major third lower than the standard electric guitar. The lower tuning also gives the baritone a heavier and thicker sound. And because of this, the instrument has a tonal depth in between that of an electric guitar and a bass guitar. It has a really unique voicing and can really help lower frequencies be more prominent and cut through a mix. But perhaps what's most interesting about the production on AM is how the band used keyboards and guitars on the album. Alex's Vox Starstream features on most of the songs on the album. Most famously, of course, the riff to Do I Wanna Know is played on that guitar. Alex has talked a lot in interviews about how new and unfamiliar instruments can often be the source of new ideas.
You have to have that initial spark, and I think interesting instruments or playing a guitar through, you know, some amp, or playing somebody else's guitar through like an amp you don't know, to get like a tone that you're less familiar with. There's a guitar I bought on the record before this. On the last day in the studio, I got this 12-string guitar called a Vox Starstream that is what I wrote the riff to Do I Wanna Know on amongst, and got played like a lot on this record. And it's really like I feel like that riff, or that song even, was like a ghost within the walls of this old guitar that I bought to some extent.
The band were clearly in a very creative space, with new guitars, drum machines and keyboards to experiment with. But as far as guitars and keyboards go, for the majority of the album, their sounds are more textural than they are discernible, more supporting character energy than main character energy. Now, this could simply be down to how the record was made. Bass and drums were the focal point, so naturally any keyboard or guitar or other instrumentation would be carefully placed to add depth but not get in the way of the drum and bass loop. But when you take the vocals out of the equation, AM is a strange listen. It's an album that really doesn't have a lot of mid-range information without the vocals, as you'd expect from a guitar-heavy album. Instead, many of the guitars sound like they've been filtered to remove the high-mid frequencies, then cleverly and subtly placed to add texture and reinforce grooves, and most importantly, leave plenty of space in the mid-range for the many, many vocal doubles on this album. Alex sang his vocals through a trusty Neumann U76 microphone. He then doubled his vocals with a falsetto 1 octave higher. This falsetto was then doubled by Matthew Helders to add thickness, with Nick eventually providing the final layer, singing an octave lower than Alex's lead vocal. The result was a thick and full vocal sound, occupying most of the mid-range of the songs. In the same Engineering the Sound interview, Alex's meticulous approach to his vocals is mentioned in detail, stating that he would often comp or edit his vocals by the syllable to achieve a flawless take. Maybe you could give Billie Eilish a run for her money. Now, if you've watched any of my previous Arctic Monkeys videos, then you'll know that I talk a lot about how Arctic Monkeys have an extended band. They have people behind the scenes that help them make their records, help them execute difficult songs live. And without them, Arctic Monkeys just wouldn't sound like they do today. AM was a special album because it was the last time that the band made a full-length studio album as just the four of them. That said, there were a few unsung heroes that contributed to the album and worked hard behind the scenes to make AM sound like AM. James Ford, the band's long-term producer and friend, helped the band transform their demos and loops into fully formed songs. He's also credited with playing the keys and tambourines on One for the Road, Number One Party Anthem, and I Wanna Be Yours. The album was co-produced with Ross Orton, another longtime friend of the band, who has previously worked with Roots Maneuver. Is it me, or does this feel like a full circle moment? Queens of the Stone Age frontman Josh Homme sings on Knee Socks and provides backing falsetto vocals on One for the Road. He also invited the band to track guitars and other instruments at his studio. Elvis Costello's drummer Pete Thomas plays percussion on the track Mad Sounds. Bill Ryder Jones of The Coral wrote and played the guitar solo in the song Fireside. And finally, John Cooper Clarke, an English punk poet from Manchester, penned what would eventually become the album's closer, I Wanna Be Yours. Alex had been a fan of Clark since his teenage years. Clark reportedly used to perform at a pub in Sheffield where Alex worked behind the bar. For me, Clark's poem I Wanna Be Yours perfectly captures the sentiment of AM.
Your vacuum cleaner breathing in your dust. Let me be your Morris Marina, I will never rust. If you like your coffee hot, let me be your coffee pot, you call the shots. I wanna be yours. Let me be your raincoat for those frequent rainy days. Let me be your dreamboat when you wanna sail away. Let me be your teddy bear, take me with you anywhere. I don't care.
Saying that, Alex Turner's done a great job putting I Want to Be Yours to music. He's done a great job on that. He converted it into a song by not doing very much and made it look easy. And that's a man who is at the top of his craft.
Alex took the words from Clark's poem and transformed them into a love song. And for me, it's quite possibly the perfect album closer. Yet another full circle moment. But perhaps the most pivotal decision made by the band was to ask Chad Blake to mix their album. Chad is known as the mad scientist of the mixing world. He uses strange and unconventional techniques to achieve massive and thumping low end for his mixes. Chad is perhaps most famous for mixing the Black Keys records, Brothers and El Camino. In interviews, he's often spoken about how when he received the multi-tracks for those albums, the songs just sounded lifeless and lacked energy, with each song being made up of only a few tracks of guitar, drums, bass and vocals. Chad spoke about how he'd used various techniques such as embellishing live drums with samples to bring the songs to life, and he did the same thing here on AM.
Chad, I love how the Arctic Monkeys AM and Black Keys El Camino have such a full bottom end, like a hip-hop record. Can you share any tips or techniques for achieving that nice full bass and kick? Cheers. That's pretty easy. Both these bands came to me saying exactly that. They wanted a live band feel, but to have some sonics that reflect the modern sound of hip-hop records. So I added a sample, and I'm pretty sure I used the samples that are on this Drumagog is the sampler that I have, and there's two samples that I use a lot, and that's Techno 15 and Techno number 5. And you just have to play with the tuning, the EQ and the phase, some maybe high pass filtering it's just got to fit with the rest of the drum kit and the bass. So play around with that and you should get it. Exactly that.
Chad is also famous for his heavy use of saturation. Saturation is a subtle form of distortion that brings out the warmth, energy and character of a sound, the kind of energy that you'd get naturally from using analog gear. This technique can be heard on almost every part of AM, with Chad using a SansAmp saturator on virtually every track. Lastly, Chad is famous for using parallel compression on his drums. This can be a complicated concept to explain for musicians that don't produce. Essentially, Chad compressed the kick and the snare sounds of the drum kit to make them sound more dynamic and punchy. He then mixed in just the right amount of this compressed sound with the original sound of the drum kit.
Omnipressor, it's a compressor and expander. So one side you go expansion, the other side it goes to compression.
This is a very common technique used in modern day music production, and it really does help to make the drums sound fat, punchy and in your face. AM was eventually decided upon as the album's title, with the band citing the Velvet Underground VU album as their source of inspiration. AM is a fitting album title. AM are the initials of the band. AM is also a timing convention used to signpost the first 12 hours of any day, and it suggests that the album might contain stories about things that happened in the early hours of the morning, after the night out, which it does. But the album was very close to being called something else entirely. A new addition to the band's gear collection collection during the AM recordings was a vintage Rickenbacker pedal steel amplifier. This tiny amplifier was reportedly used a lot to track the guitars on the album, so much so that the amp was given a nickname, the New Black. This was the original title for the album, but the band eventually decided against it, opting for AM instead. Alex Turner also designed the artwork for AM, again taking inspiration from the VU album, depicting an oscilloscope of a voltage graph instead of a VU meter, subtly spelling out the letters A and M in the middle. Simple but iconic. So, there you have it, the untold story of AM. I think I've covered just about everything that you need to know about Arctic Monkeys' most celebrated album, their second coming, and the one that made America take notice. This one is a special album for me. It was the soundtrack to the 4 years I spent at university, and it restored my faith in guitar music, at a time where there wasn't really much else out there that was inspiring me, and somewhat 11 years after its release. And it's proven itself to be a timeless masterpiece, and an album of great cultural significance that's as relevant today as it's ever been. And given the huge sonic shift that we've seen the band make since AM, with Tranquility Base and The Car, I think it's safe to say that there will be no AM Part 2. And that makes AM even more special. It was a special album, made at a special point in time for the band. And hey, maybe we don't need an AM Part 2 after all. The original always ends up being better than the sequel anyway, right? AM was also a calculated album. It was supposed to be the band's best attempt at making an accessible pop record, and Alex even seems to admit this in a recent interview, again with Zane Lowe.
It's kind of a perfect album, AM.
I think that was deliberate.
You know, people talk about it's like accidentally perfect.
When Arctic Monkeys make an album, it's not just an album, it's an event. It's here because the band have something different that they want to say. And for that, I'll be all ears. And I hope that you will be too. Drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and be sure to leave a comment below if you learned something new. I would love to hear from you if there were any facts or interesting tidbits that you didn't know about the album before you watch this video. Subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.
I've gone all in for this round.